parents meeting. This meeting tonight is just to have a little insight into how maths is taught in year 5 and year 6. Don't be too worried about the questions on the front picture that was there for you to have a go at. But these are 2 SATs questions that were picked off a previous paper that just show you that it isn't all about just basic calculations of the 4 operations, that the questions can make you think a little bit more and can be put into kind of a problem solving activity that the children have to get their head around. I'd actually did this question with my daughter's in year 6, so I did this question. She was off on Friday, so being the mum that I was, I gave her some questions to do, but I did give her this one knowing it was coming up on this meeting, and she was like, oh, I can't do that, just because it looked so different to a straightforward calculation. So it's really important that we do expose the children to these sorts of questions. She did get there in the end with a little bit of support, but don't be alarmed by it. We're not going to make you do them now, but just to be mindful that they are, you know, some of the questions are quite meaty, but they are presented in a different way to straightforward calculations.
I'm back, Stella. Can you hear me?
Yes, can do.
There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so now my slide's not changing. There we go. Okay, so in school we have a mastery approach to maths, which sort of means that the children have deep and secure understanding of the topic. So the phrase teaching for mastery describes how we teach it in school and the organisation, which gives our children the best chance of mastering maths. And achieving mastery means having a solid understanding of the maths that's being taught, so that they can go on and look at it in that problem solving context, because those questions that were on the slide before weren't difficult. If we'd given the children the calculation, they'd have been able to do it, but having the mastery of maths means that they've got the calculation in their head and they can look at a question and apply it, and they've got that really deep understanding. So we want this for all of our children, and it means that when we teach for mastery, it means that all children, with a tiny proportion of exceptions, succeed really well in maths. And those tiny proportion are those children that are working out of year group, but everybody who's working within the year group has the chance to succeed and to really, really understand it. So when we are teaching, the whole class moves through the content at the same pace. So everyone starts at the same point, and we sort of go through the maths, which means that nobody misses out the sort of the quick fire bits, because that's really, really important. But most children will get to a point where they get to deeply think about the maths and see it in a different context, and don't just do the quick fire ones and then that's it, that's the end of your maths work. Everybody gets a chance to move on to those more wordy questions and those more problem solving questions. We believe that this approach builds self-confidence in the learner, so everyone gets to feel that sort of win when they are getting things right, and then they get to talk to their partners and talk to the teacher and have lots of discussion around the questions, so they become more confident in answering them themselves. And then we differentiate, which, so, you know, back in my day, everyone would get a sort of different sheet and you'd get this, you'd get that, but, you know, different elements of maths are, people think children approach differently. So someone who's excellent at telling the time might really struggle with their times tables. So we can't just go, you have this, you have that. So we differentiate through how deep they think, rather than just going, right, you've got that, move on to this. And the 3 main concepts of maths are fluency, reasoning, and problem solving. Fluency is, do you know your times tables? Can you tell the time? Can you plot this on a graph? Reasoning would be thinking about it in context. So we're at a shop and this is happening. It's an addition question, but have you worked out that it is? And problem solving is more that open ending. We'll prove it. How many ways can you find? And sort of not knowing what the maths is when they see the question, because of course in their test that they get, it's not in a certain order. You know, in our lessons we teach multiplication and they do questions on multiplication, but they need to be able to look at a question and go, this is multiplication. So they need to be able to do that as well. And we have lots of resources in school which help support children as well. So using place value grids or maybe using counters, which means that they can still access the same work as the rest of the class, just with a more concrete resource. So I just want to show you the different types of questions they get asked. So this only goes up to 2019 because, as you all know, that is the last time we did SATs, and we're now in 2022. So it looks at the different types of questions, and as you can see, there are more explaining questions each year, and there's getting sort of less just pick an answer, which is the selected response. There's quite a lot of show your method questions, but most questions are in context, which are those like, I don't know, Sam and Elsa went to so-and-so and they had this many marbles and things like that. And that's what that means, that it's sort of in context. So they really have to work out what the question is asking them. Mrs. Ellis, over to you.
Okay, so we're just going to go through what a typical maths lesson would look like in school. So throughout the whole school, all the way up down from year 1 all the way up to year 6, we do begin with what's called a flashback 4. We actually call it a flashback 5 because there's 4 questions, but then there's always some sort of shape or clock or Roman numeral in the corner that they use as their 5th question as well. So the lesson begins with a flashback that looks at previous learning. So this is really important for the children to embed their previous learning from, can be different year groups, it can be from what they learned a week ago, what they learned in the last topic. So that the sequence of questions will go through. Usually question 1 is something they learned the day before, and then question 2 will be something they learned maybe last week, and then question 3 and 4 will be from previous topics or even something they learned in a previous year group. And this is really important to help us to look for gaps in the children's learning. So if question 3, they've all forgotten how to add fractions, say on this flashback, then that's a little opportunity to just recap how to do that. And then the children won't have forgotten it until when they come to do fractions in the next year group or later on in the year, they'll just have that knowledge refreshed each time we do these. It also lets us look for gaps in their learning. So if they've really not got multiplying by 10, then we can generally see that from the whole of the class struggling with it. And again, an opportunity just to do a little bit of recap with that. And some objectives are only taught in certain year groups, so that's why it's important as well. So on this slide, this shows that really clearly. So again, we've only got SATs questions back from 2019, but this shows us the number of marks allocated to each year group's objectives. So you can see in 2019, there was actually 32.5 marks gained from the year 3-4 curriculum. So if those children didn't have an opportunity to do flashbacks and go back over that learning, then when they come to year 6, they might have totally forgotten 32.5 marks out of the whole 110 marks on offer. So that shows us a real importance of using those flashbacks. And likewise, 25 marks were from just the year 5 curriculum, and just under half of the marks were from what they would learn in year 6. So year 6 has got new learning, but it's really important that we embed learning that's gone on in those previous year groups as well. The next slide gives an example of that. This was a question on a SATs paper from a year 3 objective. So if the children hadn't reminded themselves of how many days were in months of the year, which is only covered in the year 3 curriculum, then they would struggle to therefore answer this question. So that's a real positive as to why we look at those flashbacks and keep going over and embedding that learning from all those year groups.
Okay, so these are the White Rose lessons that we follow. I'm sure you'll sort of seen these quite a lot through various remote learning. Sorry to remind you of it. So it starts off with some basic fluency, so working through, but reasoning comes in quite early. It doesn't necessarily go fluency, reasoning, problem solving. It actually mixes them about a little bit, because you can see here you've got missing digits where they're having to use their reasoning of the fact of dividing fractions by whole numbers in order to work backwards. You can also see in question 5, it's asking you to talk with a partner. So there's lots of talk even throughout the question. And it's in a bit more context. So it's talking about someone in particular. And then right at the end, you've got some problem solving. So find values. Often there's more than one answer, and the children will be encouraged to be giving more than one answer. So even in just one lesson, it covers all the different types of questions that you would see, where you choose more than one option, or you're sort of working things out, and lots of challenging to deepen their understanding. And you've also got some support through some diagrams that we would use as part of our teaching. And often things like these that are shown at the beginning would be available for the children to use for the rest of the questions. It's just not on the sheet. Things like place value charts. So it's not necessarily easy to hard. It doesn't quite work that way. There's various challenges throughout the lesson. But as in SATs, it does tend to get trickier with the deeper thinking and builds on previous learning. Often the question before will support the question after. Oh, this is you, Mrs. Ellis, actually. I'm going to keep going.
So just going to talk a little bit about the importance of mental maths. We've really brought this to the front at school at the moment, and we've embedded in every year group again. One of the lessons of the week focuses mainly on mental maths. That can be arithmetic, it can be recall of facts for each year group, and generally asking children to talk and think about the best methods that they can use for solving quick questions. So 63% of the year 6 arithmetic papers, that's the first paper that the children year 6 do, could be answered using mental strategies. So what I've found into year 5, doing some of the mental maths papers, not SATs papers, but some mental maths tests, is that children are really heavily dependent on doing written methods. They've been taught written methods, and they think that that's the best, most efficient way to answer questions. And what I often do is I sit alongside them and I answer the mental maths questions at the same time as them. And then I shout finished, which obviously I finish before them. But then I show them that a lot of my paper, I haven't had to jot anything down because I've used a much faster and efficient method than resorting to written methods. So we really encourage children to think about what method they're using. Sometimes, yes, a written method is the most efficient way to solve a question, but other times it might be estimating and adjusting and finding ways of like partitioning and things like that to answer questions. So if we just move on to the next slide. So this was a quote from Mindful Mathematics. It isn't really a case of children choosing methods because they find them appealing or the easiest overall to do, but that they are being mindful in selecting the method that's the most appropriate for the particular numbers in a particular calculation. So I talked to my class about this, that some of them really like doing written methods because it's safe and they know how to do them. They can put one digit in each box and it all looks very, very smart and tidy. But in the case of mental maths, we want that quick solving of questions. And in the SATs paper, they wouldn't have that long. They only get 30 minutes, I think, to answer the, is it 30 questions or 40 questions? 30 minutes. They haven't got time to resort to a written method to answer all of those. So I've really tried to plug that with year 5, that we're exploring the ways of solving questions. So I encourage the children to talk about the way they've solved things, and we do this often in the flashback. So today, a classic example, the second question was £13 multiplied by 5. And some of them, I asked how they solved it, and they'd resorted to a written calculation because we'd done them last week, 2 digits by 1. So I quickly said, why did you do that? What's the most efficient way to do 13 times 5? And then somebody else said, oh, I didn't. I did 10 multiplied by 5, I have 3 multiplied by 5. Another child said, well, I knew 12 5s are 60, and then I just added another 5 on. So we were talking about the most efficient way to solve questions that you can use mentally. So as I mentioned, one lesson each week is looks at mental maths, and we look at 2 aspects of that. So one of them is rapid recall. So there's a progression document throughout the school that shows what the children in each year group should be able to work on and rapidly recall. So you can see the example for year 5 and 6 here, and you'll notice it's the same. We work on the same objectives for both year 5 and year 6. So if you've got children in both year 5 and year 6, don't be alarmed if they're coming home with the same little practice sheet that we give out. That's because, you know, year 5 and 6 do have the same objectives for that, and we just encourage, sometimes it's bigger numbers with year 6, or it's just consolidating that rapid recall so they get more efficient at doing it. So there's multiplying and dividing any number by 10 and 100, halving numbers, knowing their square numbers, because we can resort to that in areas and perimeter and things like that, cubes of numbers. So there are set objectives that we work on weekly for each year group. The other things that we look at in our mental maths lesson are mental strategies. So as I mentioned, sort of adjusting, so adding decimals. Again, you might get some children that try to put that as a written method, but there are ways that you can, that 5.7 plus 3.9, well, let's say 3.9 is 4. That's easy then to add on mentally is 9.7 and then take off the 0.1. So we talk about adjusting and we practice doing those mental strategies in that lesson. Each week, or here's another example of the little slip that you might get. You might have seen these taken home. Now, they're not taken home weekly because we do work on these strategies over a few weeks, or when we feel the children have practiced it enough in class and are ready for a little test on that. So whereas spellings are given out weekly, these mental math strategies are given out maybe over 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even longer if need be. And once they've had a go at practicing for a few weeks, then in their mental maths lesson, they will do a little test just to check that they've got that mental strategy. And again, we can come back to that in that flashback. When we've got questions like that, we can ask how they've done it and have the resource to a mental strategy rather than always relying on a written method. So here is a little bit on, we're always asked what we can focus on at home. So we've just put down for year 5, at home, those 4 operations. So we're currently working on multiplication, looking at 2-digit by 2-digit and 3-digit by 2-digit. And that is a written method, but looking at the children just need to practice those at home, just so they're solid with them and they kind of naturally can do them as opposed to having to really think. One thing I have noticed is that crucial to that is their knowledge of their times tables. And I know Mrs. Paulson will back me up with this, but yeah, the most crucial thing that you can work on with your children in year 5 and year 6 is to know their times tables inside and out. So we've got Timetable Rockstars that all children have logins for. Hit the button. I'm sure there are other ones, Cloud Tables, I think is another one that I've seen. Or it doesn't have to be always on a tablet or on a phone. It can be just writing their times table out that they're stuck on, looking for the patterns in the numbers. So look at what happens in the 9 times table, look at the relationship from the 4 times to the 8 times tables, put them up on the bedroom wall, around the kitchen, in the car on the way to school, any opportunity to chant tables. We did them all last term at swimming while they were getting changed. They were chanting tables just to try and embed that knowledge. Another big one that we've been working on, and it comes up again in year 6, is multiplying and dividing any number by 10, 100 and 1,000, and children learning to remember which way the digits move when we divide or we multiply. And again, the biggie, telling the time, knowing how many minutes in an hour, in half an hour, in quarter of an hour, and telling the time to 5-minute intervals and 1-minute intervals as well.
So year 6 is very similar. The only one I've sort of added when we were talking was the 4 operations for fractions, which is something that year 6 do. So the 4 operations by year 6, most of the children, apart from long division, which we tackle in year 6, and in year 5 it would be short division. So it's long division, long multiplication, so 3 or 4 digits times them by 2 digits, addition and subtraction. The 4 operations also applies to decimals. You need to know how to multiply, add, subtract decimals in year 6 as well. But the 4 operations for fractions is really new learning in year 6, and it's something that it's a different method for each one, and they do find it really tricky. So practicing those, you can do all sorts of stuff. BBC Bite Size has got all of the methods online, and I know there's quizzes and games with those, so they're really, really useful. But I know that CGP do some really good revision guides and quick 5-minute sort of practicing, so they're really good. Again, multiplying and dividing any number by 10, 100,000. I think sometimes when the children see a multiply or a multiplication or a division sign with big numbers, they automatically think it needs to be a written method, and that it's not. It's purely place value and moving the digits. Times tables, and I'll just reiterate, Mrs. Ellis, it is the absolute crux of all of these, because all of the above, 4 operations, fractions, 4 operations, can't happen if they don't know their times tables, because the question becomes a lot harder if you're having to search and work each one out by going 3, 6, 9, 12. I got them right then. It was a good job. So a question becomes a lot harder if you're trying to do 9 times 3 and you having to start from 3 and count up, when instead of quickly getting to 27, write the answer next. And telling the time doesn't necessarily get taught massively in year 5 and 6. It's sort of expected that they know it by then, but from my experience, I'm sure Mrs. Ellis would agree that it's not solid. And I think the age of digital clocks and phones and things have slightly taken that out. So just throw it at them at breakfast. Oh, what time is it? How long is it till we leave school? We're leaving at 1:30. How long is it till 1:30? And things like that, because timetable questions do come up on SATs papers quite a lot. So I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm sure Mrs. Ellis would be more than happy to sort of support anybody with these if anyone wanted to know how we do it in school. But the year 5s and 6 children will definitely be able to explain it to you as well, so that you can practice at home, because I know a lot of people have got a lot of methods to do these things. So I'm just going to stop the video, stop the recording, and then anyone can freely ask any questions, and you won't be on record for it.